The scent of expensive leather and champagne in the exclusive Airline's first-class lounge couldn't mask the poison brewing in the air. It started with a look, a dismissive up-and-down glance that dismissed a person's entire worth. For Caroline Preston, a woman who measured life in carat weight and thread, counts the sight of a young black girl. Headphones on, calmly reading a quantum physics textbook in seat 2B, was an affront to the natural order of things. She saw a misplaced charity case, not a quiet prodigy. This flight from New York to London would be a masterclass in entitlement and prejudice, but a storm of reckoning was gathering at 35,000 feet. And when it broke, the turbulence wouldn't just shake the plane. It would shatter a carefully constructed empire of lies. The John F. Kennedy International Airport first-class lounge for Airlines was Caroline Preston's natural habitat. It was a symphony of hushed tones, muted colors, and the gentle clinking of ice in glasses filled with top-shelf liquor. She moved through it not as a guest, but as a proprietor, her posture ramrod straight, her smile a thin painted slash of coral lipstick that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her husband, Robert, trailed a step behind a man whose expensive suit seemed to wear him rather than the other way around. He was perpetually attached to his phone, his face a mask of anxious concentration. Caroline's brand, the Affluent Ascent, was a carefully curated Instagram and YouTube persona dedicated to the art of luxury. She wasn't just wealthy. She taught others how to perform wealth. Today's performance was transatlantic elegance. Her phone, held by a small jewel-encrusted tripod on their table, was already recording a time-lapse of her sipping champagne, the iconic logo of Airlines, strategically visible on the napkin. The key, my darlings, she'd narrated to her phone earlier, is to inhabit the space. You don't just fly first class, you become first class. It's an energy, an exclusivity. Her sermon on exclusivity was interrupted by the arrival of a new passenger in the lounge. It was a girl, perhaps 16 or 17, dressed in simple, well-fitting dark jeans, a comfortable grey sweater, and clean white sneakers. Her hair was styled in intricate braids that cascaded over her shoulders. She carried a single sleek backpack and moved with an unhurried grace that seemed to annoy Caroline on a cellular level. The girl Odessa James found a quiet corner, pulled out a thick textbook titled Advanced Principles of Quantum Electrodynamics, and slipped on a pair of noise-cancelling headphones. She was in her own world. Caroline's coral smile tightened. She nudged Robert. "Look at that," she murmured, her voice a low hiss. Since when did they start letting people use their frequent flyer miles for the lounge? It lowers the tone. Robert glanced up, saw the girl, and shrugged, his eyes already returning to the frantic glow of his phone. "I don't know, honey. Maybe she's with someone." "With whom?" Caroline scoffed, her gaze sweeping the room. "There's no one. She's alone. It's a complete erosion of standards. Aura used to be so particular." She watched as a lounge attendant approached the girl, offering her a drink. Odessa politely declined with a smile and a shake of her head, never taking her eyes off her book. The effortless refusal, the lack of awe or giddy excitement at being in such a privileged source, seemed to fuel Caroline's irritation. To Caroline, luxury was a stage, and this girl was refusing to play her assigned part as the grateful interloper. The boarding call for Aura Flight 104 to London Heathrow echoed softly through the lounge. Caroline gracefully gathered her belongings, ensuring her monogrammed carry-on was perfectly angled for her passive audience on social media. She and Robert were among the first to proceed down the jet bridge, a priority she guarded jealously. Their seats 1A and 1B were at the very front of the spacious first-class cabin. As Caroline settled in, accepting a pre-departure glass of Krug, from a smiling flight attendant named David, she saw her. The same girl. She was walking down the aisle looking at the seat numbers. Caroline watched a smirk playing on her lips, certain the girl was lost and would soon be redirected back to the crowded confines of economy. But the girl stopped, right next to her. She looked at seat 2B, then at her boarding pass, and then began to deftly stow her backpack in the overhead compartment. Caroline's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of cold disbelief. Seat 2B, directly behind her husband. She leaned across Robert, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Excuse me. I think you might be in the wrong cabin." Odessa pulled off her headphones, her expression calm, almost curious. "I'm sorry." "This is first class," Caroline stated slowly as if speaking to a child. "Your seat is probably further back." "Much further back." Odessa glanced at her boarding pass again, then at the glowing number above the seat. "No, this is right. Seat 2B. "That's impossible," Caroline snapped. The lead flight attendant, David, a man with kind eyes and an air of unflappable professionalism, noticed the friction and glided over. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Preston?" he asked, his tone perfectly neutral. "Yes, David." "There is," Caroline said, gesturing with a flick of her wrist toward Odessa. "This passenger seems to be confused. I'm sure her seat is in another section. You should probably check her ticket. It's likely a mistake." David turned his polite smile to Odessa. "May I see your boarding pass?" Miss Odessa handed it to him without a word. David scanned it. His smile didn't waver. "Everything appears to be in order. Welcome aboard, miss. Seat 2B is right here. Can I get you something to drink before we take off?" "I'll just have some water, thank you," Odessa said, her voice soft but clear. She then turned, slid past Robert's seat, and settled into her own, pulling her book from her backpack before David had even left. Caroline stared, her mouth agape. She felt a hot flush of fury creep up her neck. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about the girl's composure, her complete lack of intimidation. She had been challenged by Caroline Preston, a platinum-tier million-miler icon of luxury, and she hadn't even flinched. The performance of transatlantic elegance had been disrupted by an uncooperative cast member, and Caroline was already plotting how to write her out of the show. "Robert," she seethed in a whisper, "this is unacceptable. I'm paying thousands of dollars for this ticket, for the experience, for the exclusivity. And they let that in. How did she even get a ticket like this?" Robert, finally sensing the storm brewing, put his phone down. "Caroline, just leave it. It's none of our business." "It is precisely my business," she retorted. "My followers expect a certain standard. This airline promises a certain standard, and this is not it." She watched Odessa in the reflection of her window. The girl was already lost in her book, a pen in hand, occasionally making a neat annotation in the margin. She was utterly unconcerned with Caroline, with the luxury cabin with the bubbling champagne. And that more than anything was an unforgivable sin. The battle for first class had just begun. The massive engines of the Airbus A380 spooled up with a deafening roar before settling into the steady, powerful hum of ascent. As the plane climbed through the clouds, leaving the glittering lights of New York behind, Caroline Preston began her campaign. Her first move was passive-aggressive. She flagged down David. "David, darling," she began, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "The air circulation back there seems a bit stuffy. Could you check on it? I'm just so sensitive to the cabin environment." She glanced pointedly over her shoulder toward Odessa's seat. David, ever the professional, simply nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Preston. I'll check the zone controls right away." He knew exactly what she was doing, but his job was to de-escalate, not to confront. Next came the noise complaint. Odessa, deep into her studies, had her headphones on, but the volume was so low it was inaudible to anyone more than a few inches away. Caroline, however, claimed otherwise. She summoned a junior flight attendant, a young woman named Brenda, with a nervous energy. "Excuse me," Caroline said, her voice laced with theatrical distress. "The music from that passenger's headphones is terribly distracting. It's some sort of loud, thumping bass. It's completely inappropriate for a first-class cabin. People are trying to relax." Brenda looked flustered. She approached Odessa's seat hesitantly. "Miss, I'm so sorry to bother you, but could you possibly turn your music down a little?" Odessa looked up, blinking. She pulled one side of her headphones off. There was no sound. "I'm not listening to music," she said plainly. "It's a lecture series on quantum field theory. The volume is on the lowest setting." Brenda's face flushed with embarrassment. She could see now that the girl was telling the truth. "Oh, I'm so sorry. The passenger in front," she said. "It's fine," Odessa said, offering a small, tired smile. She understood the game being played. She put her headphones back on, deliberately turning the volume dial down to 0, though it was already barely audible. She refused to give Caroline the satisfaction of a reaction. This only enraged Caroline further. The girl's placid resilience was like a mirror reflecting her own ugly behavior. She needed to escalate to force a reaction to prove that she was in control. During the meal service, the main event began. First class was being served a 5-course meal, starting with caviar and chilled vodka. When David arrived at Odessa's seat, she politely declined the caviar. "I'll just have the salad and the main course, thank you," she said, "and just water to drink." Caroline, who was making a great show of savoring every single glistening egg of caviar for her online followers, overheard this. She leaned over to Robert, her voice now loud enough for several surrounding passengers to hear. "Can you believe it? She probably doesn't even know what caviar is. Probably thinks it's some kind of jam." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Honestly, what's the point of being up here if you can't appreciate the finer things? It's just wasted on some people. They're probably used to, well, you know, something from a drive-through." The insult was so direct, so dripping with racist and classist condescension, that a palpable silence fell over the front of the cabin. A man in seat 3A, a well-dressed businessman, lowered his newspaper and shot Caroline a look of pure disgust. Robert squirmed in his seat, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "Caroline, for God's sake, stop it," he muttered under his breath. But Caroline was on a roll. This was her stage, and she finally had an audience. Odessa slowly placed her fork down. She took a deep breath, closed her book, and turned in her seat to face Caroline directly. Her voice when she spoke was not angry or hurt. It was cold, analytical, and devastatingly precise. "Ma'am," she began, her eyes locking onto Caroline's, "just so we're clear, my refusal of the caviar has nothing to do with a lack of appreciation. Beluga sturgeon are critically endangered, primarily due to overfishing for this very delicacy. Their population has declined by over 90% in the last few decades. I choose not to contribute to the extinction of a species for a fleeting sensory experience. It's a matter of ethical principle, not palate." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Furthermore," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "your assumption that my preference for water over champagne is due to some sort of cultural ignorance is also incorrect. I am 16 years old. It is illegal for me to consume alcohol. I am also flying to London to compete in the International Youth Physics Olympiad. I prefer to keep my mind sharp. I hope that clarifies things for you." The cabin was dead silent. The businessman in 3A let out a low whistle of appreciation. David, who had been hovering nearby, had to physically bite his lip to keep from smiling. Brenda looked at Odessa with open admiration. Caroline's face, which had been smug and triumphant moments before, was now a mottled canvas of shock and fury. She had been publicly and intelligently dismantled by a teenager. The influencer, the arbiter of taste, the queen of her gilded cage had been made to look like a fool. Well, she sputtered, searching for a comeback. What a very rehearsed little speech. "I'm sure your sponsors would be very proud." The insinuation was clear. She was still convinced Odessa was a charity case, someone who had been coached on how to behave. "I don't have sponsors," Odessa replied evenly. She turned back around in her seat, picked up her book, and took a sip of her water. The conversation, as far as she was concerned, was over. But for Caroline, it was a declaration of war. Her public humiliation had to be avenged. She was no longer just trying to put a girl in her place. She was trying to destroy her. She gripped the armrest, her knuckles white, her mind racing for a way to regain control. The flight was long, and she was dangerously patient. The polite intellectual smackdown had done nothing to chasten Caroline Preston. It had only ignited the core of her entitled rage. Humiliation was not an emotion she processed. It was an injury she avenged. For the next hour, she stewed her champagne glass, refilled twice, by a wary Brenda who avoided eye contact. Robert had retreated deep into his phone, his silence a form of surrender. Caroline's mind churned, searching for a new angle of attack. The girl was smart, that much was clear. So intellect was out, ethics were out. The only weapon left in Caroline's arsenal was brute force entitlement. She would create a problem so large, so disruptive, that the airline would have no choice but to bend to her will. She pressed the flight attendant call button. The soft chime echoed in the tense cabin. David appeared instantly. "Yes, Mrs. Preston, I am no longer comfortable," Caroline announced, her voice resonating with theatrical gravity. "I feel threatened. That girl," she gestured over her shoulder with a contemptuous thumb, "has been glaring at me ever since our little misunderstanding. Her hostility is making it impossible for me to relax. I am a paying customer, and I have a right to a peaceful and safe environment." David's professional mask was beginning to crack at the edges. He could see Odessa perfectly. She was asleep, her book resting on her chest, her headphones still on. Her face was peaceful, turned toward the window. "Ma'am," David said, his voice low and firm. "The passenger in 2B is asleep. Don't you dare gaslight me." Caroline snapped, her voice rising. Several heads popped up over the tops of their seats. "She is faking it. It's a passive-aggressive tactic. I know her type. She is deliberately trying to intimidate me. I want her moved. Now." This was the nuclear option. Asking for a passenger to be moved in first class was virtually unheard of unless there was a legitimate safety or security threat. "Preston, I can assure you she is not a threat," David said, trying to soothe her. "Our cabin is completely full. There is nowhere to move her to." "Then move her to economy," Caroline exclaimed. "That's where she clearly belongs anyway. Just get her out of my sight. I don't care how you do it." The businessman in 3A finally spoke up. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice a low baritone of authority. "The young lady has been a model passenger. This woman has been harassing her since we boarded." Caroline whirled on him. "You stay out of this. This does not concern you." "It concerns everyone when a passenger is being bullied," the man retorted calmly. The situation was spiraling out of David's control. He was caught between a volatile, high-value passenger making baseless but loud accusations and the reality of the situation. Protocol dictated his next move. "Mrs. Preston, if you could please lower your voice," he said, a new edge of command in his tone. "I'm going to have to consult with the captain." "You do that," Caroline screeched, triumphant. "You go get the captain. I will tell him exactly what's been going on. The harassment, the threats, the complete failure of your crew to manage this situation." David gave a curt nod and disappeared toward the cockpit. Brenda stood frozen near the galley, her face pale. She looked at Odessa still sleeping, oblivious to the storm raging around her. This was no longer just a passenger dispute. It was a full-blown incident. The crew was, in a word, shaken. They were trained for medical emergencies, for security threats, for technical malfunctions. They were not trained for a first-class passenger imploding with such irrational, venomous fury. Their every move would be scrutinized. A complaint from someone like Caroline Preston could lead to disciplinary action, a black mark on their records. They were walking on eggshells on a flight that had suddenly become a high-stakes psychological drama. A few minutes later, David returned, followed by Captain Mitchell. The captain was a tall man with silvering hair and a calm, commanding presence. He knelt in the aisle between Caroline and Robert's seats, creating a zone of quiet authority. "Mrs. Preston." "I'm Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice steady and low. "My lead flight attendant tells me you're experiencing some distress." "Distress is putting it mildly," Captain Caroline said, launching into her prepared narrative. She painted a picture of a hostile, menacing girl who had been glaring, muttering, and making her feel unsafe. She embellished every detail, twisting Odessa's quiet composure into a sinister plot against her. "My safety is your responsibility, Captain. And I am telling you I am not safe with that person behind me." Captain Mitchell listened patiently, his eyes occasionally flickering to the sleeping form of Odessa. When Caroline was finished, he took a breath. "Ma'am, I understand your concern," he began. "However, I have received a report from my flight crew, and I've also spoken to another passenger who has corroborated their account. By all objective measures, the passenger in 2B has been perfectly behaved. She has been reading, and she is now asleep." "So you're calling me a liar?" Caroline gasped, clutching her chest in mock horror. "I am stating the facts as they have been presented to me by multiple sources," the captain corrected her gently. "It is the judgment of my crew and myself that there is no safety or security threat in this cabin. Therefore, I will not be moving any passengers. I need to ask you to please return to your seat and help us ensure a peaceful flight for the remainder of our journey to London." His words were calm, but the message was absolute. He had heard her judged the situation and ruled against her. There was no higher authority on that plane to appeal to. Caroline stared at him, her face a thunderous mask. She had played her trump card and lost. The captain, the ultimate power on the aircraft, had sided with the girl. Her power trip had hit a solid wall of professional authority. Defeated but not silenced, she sank back into her seat. "This is not over," she hissed to Robert, loud enough for the captain to hear. "I will be filing the most damning complaint this airline has ever seen. I will have all of you fired, captain, flight attendants. Everyone. Just you wait." Captain Mitchell simply stood up. "Enjoy the rest of your flight." "Mrs. Preston," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He gave a small nod to David and returned to the cockpit. Caroline sat in stony, simmering silence. She had been publicly contradicted and neutralized. But in her mind, the war was far from over. She pulled out her phone. If the crew wouldn't give her what she wanted, she would take her case to the court of public opinion. She began to type, crafting a very different version of the story for her hundreds of thousands of followers. A story where she was the victim and Aura Airlines was the villain, protecting a hostile intruder in the sanctuary of first class. The landing at Heathrow was still hours away, and she would use every minute to build her case and prepare her revenge. The descent into London was as tense as the flight had been. Caroline Preston was a coiled viper in seat 1A, refusing drinks, ignoring the flight attendants, and furiously typing on her phone. She was composing a masterpiece of victimhood, a scathing blog post, and accompanying video script that would decimate Aura Airlines' reputation. She had already posted a cryptic Instagram story on Aura Flight 104, and having the most appalling first-class experience of my life. Staff are protecting a hostile and aggressive passenger at the expense of our safety. Full story coming soon. Aura Airlines. Nach ein first-class fail. Nach customer service nightmare. The likes and concerned comments were already pouring in. Odessa had woken up about an hour before landing. She seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere, but chose to ignore it, focusing instead on organizing her notes for the competition. She was a small island of tranquility in a sea of Caroline's toxic energy. As the plane taxied to the gate at Heathrow, Caroline was practically vibrating with anticipation. She had her phone ready to film the disgraceful crew as she deplaned. She was going to get David's name, Brenda's name, and she was going to make them infamous. The seatbelt sign pinged off, but before anyone could stand, the captain's voice came over the intercom, not with the usual cheerful welcome, but with a formal, unusual announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at London Heathrow. However, we ask that you please remain in your seats for a few moments. We need to wait for a company official to board the aircraft before deplaning can begin. We apologize for the short delay. A murmur of confusion went through the cabin. This was highly irregular. Caroline, however, smirked. "See," she whispered to Robert. "They know. My complaint must have already been flagged. They're sending someone to apologize to me personally." Robert just grunted, his face ashen. He had a bad feeling about this. The entire flight had been a slow-motion car crash, and he felt like they were about to hit the wall. The jet bridge connected with a soft bump. The cabin door was opened. David stood at the front, his expression unreadable. Captain Mitchell emerged from the cockpit and stood beside him, his arms crossed. Two figures appeared in the doorway. The first was the Aura Airlines station manager for Heathrow, a man in a sharp suit, looking profoundly nervous. The second figure, however, commanded the attention of the entire cabin. She was a tall, elegant black woman who radiated an aura of calm, unshakable authority. She wore a perfectly tailored navy blue business suit and carried herself with the kind of innate confidence that made Caroline's performative arrogance look cheap and theatrical. Her eyes, like polished obsidian, swept over the first-class cabin, assessing the scene in a single, sweeping glance. Caroline watched, confused. This wasn't the groveling customer service agent she had expected. This woman looked like a high-level executive. The woman's eyes landed on Odessa in seat 2B. A small, warm smile touched her lips, a smile of profound love and pride. Odessa, she said, her voice a rich, melodic alto that carried through the silent cabin. "How was your flight, my love?" Odessa's face broke into a radiant grin. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "It was educational, Mom," she said, walking to the front. She hugged the woman tightly. The cabin held its collective breath. "Mom." Caroline's brain struggled to process the information. The station manager and Captain Mitchell were standing at attention, treating this woman with a level of deference reserved for royalty. The woman, Dr. Anika James, held her daughter for a moment before turning her gaze forward. Her eyes, now stripped of their warmth, settled on Caroline Preston. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Captain Mitchell stepped forward. "Dr. James," he said, his voice filled with respect. "Welcome aboard. We had a situation during the flight. Mrs. Preston in Seat 1A lodged a series of complaints against your daughter." Dr. James's expression did not change. It didn't need to. Her stillness was more intimidating than any outburst. She looked from the captain to Caroline, who was now frozen, her phone held limply in her hand, her face a mask of dawning horror. "I see," Dr. James said softly. "I was briefed on the situation by my executive team before we landed. The reports from the flight log the captain and multiple passenger witnesses were quite detailed." She took a step closer, her gaze pinning Caroline to her seat. "Mrs. Preston," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I am Dr. Anika James. Odessa is my daughter." She paused, letting the words sink in, then delivered the final devastating blow. "And I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aura Airlines." A collective gasp swept through the passengers who could hear. The businessman in 3A let out a single sharp laugh of pure, unadulterated disbelief. David, the flight attendant, felt a wave of dizzying relief wash over him. Brenda looked like she might faint. Caroline's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face, leaving her makeup standing out in stark, garish relief. Her mind replayed the entire flight in a horrifying flash. Her sneers in the lounge, her complaints about the thumping bass, her condescending lecture on caviar, her demands to have Odessa moved to economy, her threats to have the crew fired. She had not been harassing some random girl who had gotten lucky with an upgrade. She had been harassing the daughter of the most powerful person in the entire company. She had spent 7 hours making an enemy of the one woman who held the fate of the airline and everyone in it in her hands. The crew was shaking, but it was no longer with fear of Caroline's complaint. It was with the seismic shock of a twist so poetic, so profound, it felt like something out of a movie. Karma hadn't just knocked on Caroline Preston's door. It had kicked the door off its hinges with the steel-toed boot of the CEO herself. The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the airport outside. Caroline Preston sat petrified, her carefully constructed world collapsing in on itself. The woman standing before her wasn't just a CEO. She was the architect of the very stage on which Caroline had chosen to perform her ugliest self. Dr. Anika James did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her power was a palpable force, calm and utterly implacable. She addressed Captain Mitchell and David first. "Captain Mr. Jensen," she said, her tone professional and crisp. "Thank you and your crew for your exemplary professionalism in an incredibly difficult situation. Your adherence to protocol and your refusal to capitulate to baseless and discriminatory demands was precisely what I expect from Aura Airlines staff. Please be assured that this incident will be noted in your records as a commendation, not a complaint." David visibly relaxed, a wave of relief, so profound he felt light-headed. Captain Mitchell gave a curt, respectful nod. "Thank you, Dr. James." Then she turned her full, undivided attention back to Caroline. Her eyes were like a surgeon's scalpel dissecting Caroline's pathetic display of entitlement layer by layer. "Mrs. Preston," she began, her voice a low, chilling monotone. "Let's be very clear about what happened here. You did not have a bad customer service experience. You engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment against a minor. You made baseless, classist, and racist assumptions about my daughter. You attempted to weaponize your status as a first-class passenger to bully my crew and have another human being humiliated and removed for your own comfort. She took another step closer, lowering her voice even further, forcing Caroline to lean in to hear. Aura Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment of any kind, whether it is directed at our staff or our passengers. It is outlined in Section 14, subsection C of the carriage contract you agreed to when you purchased your ticket. Caroline's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. The mention of the specific contract clause was a masterstroke, transforming the situation from a personal dispute into a cold, hard legal matter. You created a hostile environment. You made false accusations against my crew. You disrupted the peace and safety of this cabin. Dr. James continued, her cadence never faltering. You did all of this while I understand attempting to document it for your social media brand, The Affluent Ascent. It's an interesting name, Mrs. Preston, because true affluence, true class is not about the price of your ticket. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching, or when you think the person you are mistreating has no power. She gestured to the Heathrow station manager. Mr. Davies, please take note. Mrs. Caroline Preston and her husband, Mr. Robert Preston, are to be placed on the permanent no-fly list for Aura Airlines. This ban will extend to all of our Sky Alliance partner airlines, globally, effective immediately. Robert, who had been trying to shrink into the upholstery of his seat, let out a choked sound. A global ban on the entire alliance was a corporate death sentence for anyone who traveled internationally for business. Their return tickets are cancelled without refund, Dr. James added. They will be escorted from the aircraft by airport security to ensure they do not cause any further disruption. A full report of this incident will be logged and shared with our corporate legal team. She finally looked at Robert, her gaze dismissive. Sir, your silence was complicity. You watched your wife harass a child for hours and did nothing. That, in its own way, is just as reprehensible. She then stepped back, her demolition of Caroline complete. She turned to her daughter. Odessa, let's go. You have a busy week ahead. As Odessa collected her backpack, she made eye contact with Caroline one last time. There was no triumph in her eyes, no malice. There was only a quiet, weary sadness. It was the look of someone who had seen this kind of ugliness before and knew she would see it again. That single pitying glance was more damning to Caroline than all of Dr. James's powerful words. It told her she wasn't a worthy adversary. She was just a pathetic obstacle. Two uniformed airport security officers appeared at the cabin door. Their presence was stark and official. The other first-class passengers began to gather their belongings, trying not to stare, but failing completely. Their whispers were a rising tide. Did you hear that the girl's mother owns the whole airline, that awful woman? She got exactly what she deserved. Can you imagine banned from the whole alliance? The businessman from 3A walked past Caroline's seat as he deplaned. He paused, looked her straight in the eye and said, Some things can't be bought, madame. Dignity is one of them. As the security officers approached her seat, Caroline finally found her voice, a pathetic, desperate squeak. You can't do this. I have followers. I have influence. I'll sue you, Dr. James, already. Halfway down the jet bridge with her arm around her daughter, paused without turning around. Please do, she called back over her shoulder, her voice echoing in the corridor. My legal team is the best in the world. I'm sure they'd find it very educational. The finality in her voice was absolute. Caroline Preston, the self-proclaimed empress of luxury, was no longer a first-class passenger. She was just a problem being removed, Her reign had ended before she even left the plane. The humiliation on the plane was only the beginning. For Caroline Preston, the hard karma she had earned at 35,000 feet was about to hit her on the ground with the force of a hurricane. The first tremor occurred before she had even cleared customs at Heathrow. While being escorted through the terminal, her face a mask of tear-streaked rage. Her phone began to buzz incessantly. The cryptic Instagram story she had posted mid-flight had backfired spectacularly. The businessman from seat 3A, it turned out, was a well-known tech CEO named Walter Thorne, with a significant and respected social media presence of his own. He hadn't just witnessed the event, he had live-tweeted it. His thread began simply on Aura 104, witnessing an absolutely vile display of racism and entitlement in first class. A woman is relentlessly harassing a young black girl who is just trying to read a book. He continued to post updates throughout the flight, factually recounting Caroline's complaints, Odessa's intelligent rebuttal about the endangered sturgeon, and the captain's intervention. His final tweet posted as he walked off the plane was the one that went viral. Update. The finale was better than a movie. The girl's mother just boarded. Her name is Dr. Anika James. She's the founder and CEO of Aura Airlines. The entitled passenger who I've identified as influencer, Caroline Preston, the affluent ascent, has just been banned for life from the entire airline alliance. You can't make this stuff up. Atam Karma Isan. James. The hashtag started trending within the hour. Walter's story was seen as credible and was immediately picked up by news outlets and gossip blogs. While Caroline had been crafting her narrative of victimhood, the truth had already lapped the world twice. Her carefully curated empire began to crumble in real time. The second, more devastating shockwave hit Robert. As they sat in a grim, sterile room, waiting for customs to process their now complicated entry into the UK, he received an email. It was from the European logistics firm he'd been courting for months. He was in London to finalize a massive company-making contract to make Aura Airlines their exclusive transatlantic freight carrier. The email was brutally short. Mr. Preston, we have been made aware of the incident on Aura Flight 104. Our firm's partnership with Aura Airlines is one we value immensely, built on a foundation of mutual respect and integrity, qualities embodied by Dr. James herself. In light of your and your wife's conduct, we are terminating our negotiations with your company, effective immediately. We cannot in good conscience do business with individuals who demonstrate such appalling character. All future communications should be directed to our legal department. Robert read the email 3 times, his face turning the color of ash. The deal wasn't just dead, it was annihilated. He looked at his wife, who was still trying to delete the flood of hateful comments on her Instagram page. It's gone, Caroline. He whispered, his voice hollow. The whole thing, it's all gone. Because of you. The karma cascade continued relentlessly. Brands that had paid Caroline thousands for sponsored posts began to publicly sever ties. The high-end luggage company, whose bag she'd so proudly displayed, issued a statement. We are disgusted by the behavior of Caroline Preston. Our brand stands for elegance and respect. We have terminated our partnership and will be making a donation to a charity supporting STEM education for minority girls. The cosmetic company whose lipstick she wore, the designer whose surf was draped around her neck. One by one, they dropped her each statement another nail in the coffin of her career. Her followers, the source of her power, were abandoning her in droves. Her comment sections were a raging torrent of disgust. People dug up her old posts, re-examining them through the new lens of her revealed character, pointing out the subtle prejudice and entitlement that had always been there. By the time the Prestons finally checked into a dreary airport hotel, their 5-star Mayfair reservation had been mysteriously cancelled, Caroline's online world was a smouldering ruin. She tried to post her side of the story, a rambling, tearful video about being misunderstood and attacked, but it was too late. Walter Thorne's account, corroborated by dozens of other passengers who were now gleefully sharing their own stories, had set the narrative in stone. She wasn't the victim. She was the villain in a story of righteous comeuppance that the internet was devouring with glee. The most cutting blow came from an unexpected source. A small independent journalist discovered that Caroline's entire affluent Ascent brand was built on a foundation of debt. Her luxury lifestyle was a leased and leveraged mirage. The house was mortgaged to the hilt the cars were on, financing plans, and the designer clothes were often bought worn for a photo and then returned. She didn't teach people how to be rich. She taught them how to fake it just as she had. The story was a viral sensation. Caroline Preston was not just a bully. She was a fraud. The hard karma hadn't just taken her flight status and her career. It had taken the one thing she valued more than anything else, her illusion of superiority. Stripped bare of her sponsorships, her airline status, and her husband's business deal, she was left with nothing but the ugly truth of who she was, exposed for the entire world to see. 3 months later, the violent ripples from Aura Flight 104 had calmed, leaving behind a fundamentally altered landscape. The world, with its voracious appetite for drama and its fleeting attention span, had largely moved on to the next viral story. But for those at the epicenter, the consequences were as permanent as scars. For Caroline and Robert Preston, the descent was brutal and absolute. Their life in the sun-drenched, glass-walled house in Connecticut evaporated like a mirage. They now inhabited a small, damp bungalow on a forgotten street in a town whose primary color was gray. The peeling paint on the porch railing was a constant mocking reminder of the gilded lacquer of their former lives. The hard karma hadn't just been a single event. It was a cascade, a relentless series of falling dominoes. Their social circle, a constellation of fair-weather friends and transactional acquaintances, had vanished overnight. The phones, once buzzing with invitations and collaboration offers, were now silent. The silence was the heaviest consequence of all. Their relationship, always a business partnership masked as a marriage, had fractured under the strain. Robert, a ghost in his own home, finally broke one dreary afternoon. "You know I lost everything," he said, his voice flat and dead, not even looking at her from his seat at their cheap laminate kitchen table. A 30-year career, a lifetime of building contacts, all of it incinerated in 7 hours because you couldn't stand to see a black girl sitting in a nice chair. Caroline, who had been staring out the window at a neighbor's overgrown lawn, whirled around her face, contorted with a familiar, impotent rage. "How dare you? I was defending our status, our brand." "You just sat there buried in your phone like a coward." "Defending what?" "Caroline," he shot back, finally meeting her gaze with eyes hollowed out by defeat. An illusion. It was all fake, all of it. The affluent Ascent was built on credit cards and my business prospects. You weren't an empress, you were just running a tab. And when the bill came due, you took me down with you. She had no response. His words struck at the fraudulent core of her identity, and the truth of them left her breathless. She was no longer a villain or a victim. She was simply irrelevant. The greatest punishment for a narcissist was not hatred, but indifference. The world had not only judged her, it had forgotten her. Conversely, for the crew of Flight 1044, the incident became a defining moment of pride. Dr. James had followed through on her promise. David Jensen was now a lead trainer at Aura's London Heathrow hub. In a bright, modern classroom, he stood before a group of new recruits, his uniform immaculate, his bearing confident. "Protocol is your shield," he told them, his voice resonating with hard-won experience. "It will protect you when a situation gets difficult, but your humanity is your sword." Dr. James's actions that day reinforced what we call the Aura Way. We protect our passengers and our crew from harassment without exception. Your authority in the cabin is not just about safety, it's about decency. Never let anyone, regardless of their ticket price, make you compromise that. His story became a legend within the company, a testament to the fact that their CEO had their backs. Aura Airline's stock had climbed 15% in the following quarter, with business journals citing its unshakable corporate integrity as a key driver of consumer trust. For Odessa James, the aftermath was quieter, but no less profound. She had, with the calm focus that so infuriated Caroline Preston, won the International Youth Physics Olympiad. Her project, a theoretical model for observing graviton decay, was hailed as revolutionary. But as she sat with her mother a few days later in the serene top-floor London office of Aura Airlines, the gold medal on the table between them seemed less significant than the turbulence she had endured to get there. Below them, the city of London bustled a complex and intricate system of movement, much like the equations in her textbook. A newspaper on the coffee table featured a small follow-up article on the Prestons' spectacular social and financial collapse. Odessa glanced at it, her expression not of triumph, but of deep contemplation. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked, her voice soft, breaking the comfortable silence. "Dealing with people like that?" Dr. Annika James looked away from the panoramic window, her gaze settling on her daughter with a profound mixture of love and understanding. She took a moment considering the weight of the question. "No, my love. I don't think it gets easier," she said, her voice rich with a lifetime of experience. "The world will always have its Carolines. People whose own insecurities are so vast, they must try to shrink everyone around them to feel tall." When I was first trying to secure funding for this airline, a banker told me I should be more realistic about my ambitions, that it was a field for men with established legacies. He didn't see me. He saw a box he wanted to put me in. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with Odessa's. "The noise doesn't get easier to hear, but you get stronger. You learn that their noise is a reflection of their own emptiness, not your worth. You develop an inner core so solid that their words just shatter against it." She reached across the table and placed her hand over her daughter's. "What you did on that plane, Odessa, it was remarkable. You didn't engage her rage. You didn't sink to her level. You responded with facts, with ethics, with dignity. In the face of that much ugliness, you maintained your altitude. That is a power they can never understand and can never take away." Her voice thickened with emotion. "I have never been more proud of you, not for the medal, but for that." Odessa's smile was a slow dawn. Her mother's words reframed the entire ordeal. It wasn't a scar of victimization. It was a testament to her own quiet strength. She looked out at the vast skyline again. The concept of altitude resonated with her physicist's mind. It was about perspective. From a great height, the chaos on the ground resolves into patterns. The frantic, angry movements of one person seem small, predictable, governed by the sad gravity of their own prejudice. She thought of the universal laws she studied, elegant, consistent, and true, regardless of who believed in them. She would anchor herself to those truths, to the beauty of discovery, and the integrity of her own mind. The world was full of Carolines, trapped in their gilded cages, mistaking privilege for worth. But Odessa was an explorer of the cosmos. She had her own ascent to focus on one measured not in thread counts or airline status, but in the limitless starlit expanse of knowledge and the quiet, unshakable strength of her own convictions. And at that altitude, the turbulence from below could never, ever touch her. The story of Caroline Preston is a stark reminder that in our hyper-connected world, the truth always finds a way to surface. Her attempt to use her privilege as a weapon backfired in the most spectacular way, proving that true power isn't about status or wealth, but about character and integrity. It's a powerful lesson in how quickly a life built on arrogance and deceit can be dismantled when it collides with quiet confidence and undeniable truth. The karmic justice was not just swift, it was absolute, a perfect reflection of the ugliness she put out into the world. If you believe that karma always finds its address and that dignity will always win over prejudice, then please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates a story of epic comeuppance. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story, where entitlement gets its wings clipped. Thank you for listening.